Hey guys, my name is Kat and I'm a doll muñequita repainter. I've just started my doll paint journey a year ago and I think it's time I start my YouTube journey as well. What better way to kick off my first doll repainting video than to start with a character I absolutely adore? When the pandemic hit, Animal Crossing was the only thing that supplied me with serotonin and I absolutely fell in love with Celeste. So I've decided to turn my favorite astrologist owl into a doll. This is my first tutorial, so I'm still getting the hang of recording things, but I hope you guys enjoy watching the process of how I made my Celeste. So I did a quick sketch on paper, then brought it into Photoshop to get the colors down. I wanted Celeste to have a youthful and playful librarian look since she knows a lot about astrology but also feels very playful and sweet. I also wanted to give her an owl-esque features like the yellow-orange lips reminiscent of her beak and yellow socks to visually act as if her little owl feet. I also went for a Victorian era style shoe since the point someone reminds me of claws and I felt like it fit the librarian look. Now I love when Celeste looks up at the sky and has little stars in her eyes, so I decided to include that on my doll. Glittering midnight blue eyes with stars reflecting in them. I also love her little wings and tail and I wanted to keep that in the design, so I came up with the idea of giving her a cute little cloak. For this doll, I'm using Caddy Noir from Monster High. Her skin tone was perfect for Celeste. I didn't know I was going to record a tutorial first, so I accidentally started off screen. I cut off her ears and I saved them for later. I also started with a couple layers of Mr. Super Clear and blushed her with pinks and magentas around her cheeks and her eyes. I wanted Celeste to have more big eye owl looks, so I purposely drew her eyes rounder than the doll sculpt. I made sure to keep the irises big enough so you can tell that there's a dip in the eye where the original eye was. I find flipping the doll upside down helps change the view and make the eyes a bit more symmetrical. It's the real life version of flipping your image on Photoshop to check if your drawing is looking okay. Here I'm adding some blue to start creating the midnight sky blue eyes. Between every few layers, once I'm happy with what I have, I spray it with Mr. Super Clear. I slowly build up the layers and pigment with each layer so it can get a little darker and stronger. Here you see me flipping the doll upside down to get the perfectly even eyelid folds. The eyelashes are always a super hard part for me to get even, but I try my best. This time I decided to also add red eyelashes into the mix to match her red hair along with, regular black eyelashes. I'm attaching the ears I had cut off earlier and shaved down to resemble human ears using E6000 glue. I don't recommend this, they fell off and I wound up having to use super glue. I blushed the whole body off screen, sorry. So here I'm doing the final touches and I'm adding gold nail polish. I had this bride shirt that fit the doll and was the exact style of the sweater I wanted to make, so I decided to make a stencil out of it. I simply traced it and then did two halves for the back and left some extra space in order to add Velcro to close it later. I also cut this long strip at the border at the bottom like the brat sweater had so I can attach it and give it a nice finished look. Once I've sewn it all together, using a toothpick as a ruler, I start creating diagonal lines to mimic the design on Celeste's little belly. I continue using the toothpick in order to paint the shirt with pink fabric paint and white fabric paint and to make sure that I have everything precise. Once I finish painting the sweater, I go in this dusty pink embroidery thread to give the sweater a little bit more of dimension. I found this sheer fabric lying around, so I decided to use it for Celeste's sleeves. I just measured it out, cut it to size, and sewed the ends. After it's sewn, I take a little strip of the same fabric and I turn it into a cuff using fabric glue. I made it a little tight, so that way I slide it over the sleeve so I can create this lovely puffed sleeve effect. Here I'm making the telescope, most of which I wound up not recording because it was an experiment and my first time using Worbla. I heat up the Worbla using a heat gun. Actually, my friend's heat gun that I stole. Thank you, Ellie. I just cut out multiple strips of Worbla and bend them over this red craft foam that I rolled and glued together using my glue gun. Here I just cut off some of the excess Worbla while it's still hot and continue to adhere it to itself. I also end up making smaller strips of Worbla to make it look more of like the eye-seeing part of the telescope. I don't know the name of it, and I just adhere it to itself. Here I've already added some other details. I cut them out using some random circular things that I had, and I'm attaching the other piece. I actually used a hole puncher to create those little circular knobs. It was really hard though, it hurt the palm of my hand, so I don't know if you should do that. I found these sticks at the dollar store and I use them for the base and like the feet of the telescope. I just cut them off with an Xacto knife and I cut them to size and I measured it out, and then I do the tips with some Worbla. Gotta make sure it stands. I don't want it toppling over in the middle of the photo shoot. I then cut some more strips of Worbla and I wrap it around the ends just to add a little nice touch. So later I'm going to paint it all gold and it's going to look all nice and polished and finished. I actually made yarn wefts, but I did that off screen again because I didn't know I was going to do a tutorial, but here we are. As you see, I'm sectioning off the hair as I go and I'm cutting it little by little. And I did the same thing with the bangs. I actually found these perfect little pearl pins. They were really small, so I just used that, and then for the one on the bangs, I just cut the pin off with pliers and I glued it on with super glue. Now here comes the most chaotic part of the video, the sewing. I'm no expert in sewing. In fact, what I do is when I want to ruffle something, I actually tape it together and I specifically organize the ruffles to which specific way I want it, and then I stitch it. For the little sleeves attached to the dress, I use the same ruffle technique, and then I grab a strip of fabric that I cut and I fold that and sandwich it in between. I used fabric glue for this, and I did it this way and I didn't sew it because I worried that sewing it would be too bulky. To make sure that it fits all right, I try it on with the sweater and shirt on top. Once I've made the second ruffled sleeve strap, I take glue and I glue the skirt to the straps. Like I said before, I wanted to give her a nice cutesy young youthful look, so I'm adding this cute little lace that I found just lying around the house to the end of the skirt using fabric glue, toothpick, to glue it on nice and slowly. I then went in and took these little nail decorative stars and I glued them to the sleeves for a little detail. Here I used some doubled up gold thread that I found around the house, same thing, and I pass glue through it and I wrap it around the cuff. I then decided that one star on the cuff wasn't enough, and I went in with my E6000 glue and more of the little nail detail stars and added them all over the sleeve in this cute little design. I know for her bag I wanted to look very high quality, so I'm actually using some scraps of leather that I found at the fabric store, and I'm gluing it on with fabric glue onto a piece of cardboard. I then rinse and repeat for the other side, so then later I can come in with a random piece of cardboard that I folded to fit to the shape of the star, and I glue it all down to form the little bag. I then go in with some yellow leather paint that I again had lying around the house. Do I really think it matters you have leather paint? I don't think so, but I had leather paint, so I just used yellow paint. Maybe it'll be fine with acrylic paint, I don't know, but I used leather paint and I just painted in this bright yellow color. Here I've already sewn on a little gold metal hoop at the side of the bag so that I can attach it to the gold chain later. Using my pliers, I attach this little buckle to the chain so that way I can remove and add the bag anytime I want with ease and without worrying of scratching the doll or anything. Using some fabric glitter glue, I put some of the glue along the border of the bag and I carefully put some nice gold glitter at the edges. I just think it'll give it a nice little touch. Again, the most complicated part of the video, the sewing. Here I did the cloak and I actually used DOLLIGHTFUL's cloak stencil. I did modify it and I didn't use it exactly, but right now here you see me cutting off the edge slowly so that way I can take fabric glue and fold it over and have a nice seam. Here I have the innermost layer of the cloak and the holes for the sleeves to go on top. I trace it over so that way I can get the pattern for the sleeve, and I make sure to add a little tab so that way it can be the little part of the design for the front and the back. I trace the stencil over folded fabric and then I sew along the sleeve so that way it can be a sleeve. Sorry, I don't know how else to explain it. Here I've drawn the tail design on folded fabric and I'm going to sew all along the side so that way it can, have some shape to it and have some strength, and I'm going to flip it inside out and then I'm going to sew it on like that. Here I have the sleeves pinned on top of the interior cloak part so I can figure out exactly where to place my tail. Once I'm happy with the placement, I sew it on attached to the sleeves in the back, and then later I go back and fold over the sleeves so that it has a nice finished hem in the back. This part is more of an extra step just to make it look nice. I actually pinned the sleeves exactly where I wanted to iron it, so then later I could bring it to the iron and create a nice crease there. I then trace over the same feather design onto both of the sleeves and I measure it out and make sure that they're both even on each side. I then go back to the same technique that I used for the collar. I cut it up and I fold it over using fabric glue so that it has a nice little hem and it has this nice little design. To keep the cloak closed, I add this little hook and eye. The eye part was actually a little too big and too bulky, I felt, so I actually took some wire I had lying around and I folded it myself into a little circle and then I sew it on. I add these little stars. I found one of them is added actually on with E6000 glue. The other one, it kind of had like a plastic back to it, so I ended up running thread through it so it could kind of form a bottom. And here I cut off some chain and I sew it to one side and I actually make a little tiny hook so that it could hook to the back of the other star. In enters the notorious gold thread that I already used before. I again fold it up and I put it all alongside the edges of the coat using E6000 glue, and then I gently just put it together so it has this nice little gold finish. Before I add any feathers, I actually start to color in the design for each black part on the sleeve and the tail. For the feather parts, I actually decided to try something new. I got some feathers and I really wasn't happy with the look and I didn't like the fact that it'd probably be shedding everywhere, so I actually created yarn wefts. And what I did is at the bottom, I make sure that they're going straight down and then I put them at an angle. I did this with black yarn and with white yarn so we can have both colors on Celeste wings. Using fabric glue, I carefully with the toothpicks put some bit of the glue and then I put on the yarn wefts. If there's any spots, I will grab any extra yarn weft and I'll put it on top to fill it out. I do it really carefully and very close to the line I drew up previously so that it has a smooth finish and you can't see any bumps. I do the same thing for the white part of the feathers, and when I cut the yarn, I make sure to cut closely to the shape as possible of the sleeves and the tail. For the socks, I wind up just sewing it directly on her and then flipping the inside out. I actually didn't end up using the stencil that I had. Then I fold it over top and I add the same little white lace that I had to her dress. Using Worbla, I cut out the shape of the sole of her shoe and I start to heat it up so that way I can form it to her foot. I then did some masking tape and with the Worbla inside, tape up her foot and I start to trace out the design of the shoe that I would like to make. This is what I'm going to use for my template, and then I'm going to cut it out and I'm going to trace it onto the fabric I'm going to use to make her shoes. I use the same scraps of leather fabric that I used to make her bag, which I'm going to be painting later with the same leather paint that I had. Once I have all the pieces of the fabric cut out, I start to glue them onto the Worbla and shape it while she is wearing the shoe. I glue all the leather fabric directly onto the Worbla using E6000 glue. I could have used fabric glue, but I was worried that it wouldn't properly adhere to the Worbla. Here I'm taking the other parts of the stencils that are for the inside of the boot and I glue them in carefully. This is where the laces are going to be, so I make sure that they even up. Here I'm taking a really thick needle that I have and I'm poking holes into the shoes so that I can later lace them up. Off screen I added the tongue of the boot, and here I'm adding more of the top so it has like this little finish that these Victorian era shoes tend to have. I of course finished it all off by adding more Worbla to the bottom of the heel. Using this old wooden chopstick, I cut it to an angle and I make sure that they fit the shoe, and I'm going to start to whittle it down. Once it's whittled down to the point that I like it with that nice little curve, I sand it down and I completely smooth it out, and then I leave it to the side to glue it later. Once again, using my leather paints, I painted a dark color and then I dry brush a lighter color to give it some kind of texture and dimension. I found this gold elastic. I don't know where it came from, but I used it up to lace up the shoes and it's so nice. And here I am once again using the gold thread technique. Here I'm threading it through the glue and then I'm putting it on the shoe. I'm putting it on multiple parts of the shoe. I'm putting it in the front of the shoe, the side of the shoe, just to give it a little pop of color. Adding this little gold thread on pieces of the doll is so small and so simple, and yet I find it adds so much complexity to the doll, and it really looks like you tried really hard. So I'm really a big fan of it, and I love how it turns out each time I've done it. I truly believe it can never be too much. I'm really happy with this gold thread technique. While I do love this process, I have to admit it is a very tedious technique. I mean, here I am using a toothpick, putting little bits of E6000 glue into the precise area and crevices that I want, and then placing it closely and having to cut a little bit of the excess off. And also I have to, like I said, put this thread doubled over and run it through the glue first so it can be doubled up and it'll actually show up on whatever I'm putting it on. I glue the wooden heel onto the bottom of the shoe and I start to paint it brown. I initially wanted to give her red bottoms, but my red acrylic paint was totally expired. Here I have this two-tone fabric and it has this beautiful pink color with a slight orange reflex. So I flip it over and I make it into the shape of a rectangle so I can sew it into a bow. I perfectly sew it so that way I know that it'll look the right size once it's on Celeste's head. Then I sew all along the sides and I leave one corner open and I flip it inside out and start to stuff it with extra yarn wefts that I had. Once I finish stuffing it, I do a lateral stitch and then I take this embroidery thread and I tie it down the middle to make this cute little pillow bow look. The last finishing touch for the bow is this little chain with a little piece of pearl and star, and with that, we're finished. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you love her.